Ugh. Oh goodness. Oh my. Ah, fiddlesticks. We have to do something about this. Son of a bitch. Now nobody listens to me. Maybe you shouldn't. When I started this project, I had the bright idea to use aluminum fuel lines for airlines. And it worked out pretty well. I don't have any leaks. They're serviceable. A hot spark's never going to burn its way through like it would a plastic DOT line, so they're tough. If you don't get fancy with the fittings, it really doesn't cost much more than DOT lines. Now I'm using 3/8 fuel line for all my bags, a little bit of 1/4 inch line, and 37-degree flare fittings. I get almost all my flare fittings from discounthydraulichose.com. But you might be surprised how well it works. Not to mention it looks pretty cool. Still, nobody seems to be listening. Now as you can tell, the bed's off the truck, because it's time to do a little redecorating. I'm going to install and wire one of these newfangled valve blocks all the kids are crazy about. Going to reroute some of the airlines, for obvious reasons. I'm going to swap out the rear airbags. And I'm finally going to get around to a new recovery port setup. Probably the biggest news is we hit 1,000 subscribers just recently. So we're hitting the big time with sponsors. Today's video brought to you by Chuck, Electric Valves, Body Drops, and curse words. Now I've probably told this story enough, but when I was putting this truck together it was kind of a rush to get ready for the summer. So we had to hire a night shift. That night shift's name was Gary. The corporate office out of Sioux City, Iowa hired him off Angela's list, and he came highly recommended. As I started to dive deeper into some of the issues I was having with the truck, I found all kinds of half-ass work. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This is a fancy pants bulkhead fitting. Problem was it was installed by night shift. Occasionally when the truck's laid out, the driver's rear valves go MIA, and I have to jiggle the wiring like a madman to get them to work again. Worst of all, this fitting is smacking the way the subwoofer box. Now, this was the last straw for old Gary. Fucking Gary. Fucking Gary. Thanks a lot, dickhead. So now management's looking for a new night shift. In the meantime, I need to rip that pig out of there. I'm just going to run some straight up grommets. That bulkhead just gave me one more failure point I don't need. Alright, here we are at the firewall. You may remember this hole from a few videos back. This is supposed to have a grommet in it. I don't remember if I put it in or not, but it's been pouring heat in for the last couple seasons, and I'm over that shit. If I could just remember where I put those grommets. Damn. Oh, there it is. Now the grommets I'm using are from Seals It. I like these because I can bolt them down instead of using the kind of grommets that push in. That ain't just all good. Fortunately today we lost a dear friend. Talking about my beloved Astro rivet tool. It started acting up a little while ago. I tried replacing some of the circlips inside. It just wasn't the same. So I had to give the old girl a proper burial. But I did replace it with a new one. Now with the riv nuts installed, I used some leftover silliness to create a gasket and see out the engine bay heat. Alright, not bad. You know, grommets always remind me of butthole. So now it's time to make up a harness for the new rear setup. For that, I'm going to need 2 wires for the pressure switch, 1 wire for the tilt bed fill valve, 1 wire for the tilt bed dump valve, 1 wire for the fuel pump, and a cable for the air tank gauge. Now for this job, I'm utilizing the Boogie Wire Installation Center. And don't forget the cable for the tank pressure gauge. I'm staggering the ends of the wires since they terminate in several locations on the cab and chassis. Next, I'm going to lightly clamp the wire into my Harbor Freight vise. Then, stretch the wires out and realize the blue wire isn't long enough, then replace it with a white wire. Tucking your shirt in like a straight-up virgin is optional. To protect the harness, I like using expandable wire sleeve. I highly recommend a hot wire cutter to melt the sleeve, keep it from fraying. Subscribe. Mine has an oddly passive-aggressive message for you. I got all the wiring stretched out and tied up to the chassis. This is the wiring for the bed valves, wiring for the pressure switch, and power for the fuel pump. This little jammy right here is all the factory wiring for the tail lights. This one here on the top is the wiring for the new valve setup. Before I rip out the old air system, I thought it was worth a walkthrough. For the suspension, I'm using 8 ASCO 3/8 electric valves. And I chose 3/8 because I didn't want the system to be crazy fast. The problem is, it's still too fast. So I put some throttle valves in between the tank and the suspension valves. This gives me the ability to adjust the lift speed of each corner. To control the speed of the dump valves, I'm using adjustable valve mufflers. As you might imagine, all this is tied together with aluminum fuel lines and 37-degree fittings. To monitor ride height going down the road, I've got pressure sensors at each corner. This worked pretty well, but there are some limitations. If I'm riding down the road by myself, I know what pressure to sit at to skate along super low. The problem with a pressure-based system is if you put a passenger or so much as a sandwich in the other seat, all bets are off. I'm building a new height-based setup, but we'll get into that later. For now, let's get this old air system out of here. Now, the more I dig into it, the more things I find I want to fix. Got all these old holes. Thought about just plugging them with a bolt, but I can't do that. I'm this far into it, might as well be happy with it in the end. Also, some of the other parts are looking pretty sorry for themselves, where the lines rubbed up. They rubbed clean through the POR15 I painted this frame with. So I'm going to bite the bullet, sand this down, open some of these holes up to get them cleaned out, and weld them solid. Try as I might, I can't find an easy way to plug these holes. These are about 7/8 inch holes that I had for where the wiring would pass through from the frame to the valves. I tried every dirty trick I could think of to get out of cutting plugs for these holes. I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and do the hard thing. This is a rotor broach. Think of it as the baddest ass hole saw you can get. If I use this rotor broach on a piece of plate, I should get a plug with an OD that's just a little bit smaller than the ID of this hole. Then I can stick them in place, weld them up, grind them smooth, and make them go away forever. Here we are over at Pokey, my drill press. I've got this shitty China-made vise bolted down to this shitty China-made drill in hopes that this annular cutter won't tear the whole setup to shreds. Pray for my fingers. Well, that might have kind of worked. 4 dirty little plugs and 4 dirty little holes. Come on, machine gun, let's ride! So, after a lot of grinder work and some DA work, it didn't come out quite as good as I'd hoped. And to be perfectly honest, I think where I went wrong was I cleaned up these plugs with a grinder to get all the mill scale off before I welded them. I think I ended up beveling the top of them a little bit, which created a low spot all the way around. I don't know. Now, with the sad state of my airlines, I'm taking the opportunity to upgrade my valve setup with this Slam Specialties SV8C valve manifold. Other than being a mouthful, that's what she said. I got this little honey from James Penwell and the kind lads at the Facebook giveaway page, Low and Fast. Now, with these valve setups, you can add some smart controls, but I've seen too many of these magic black boxes have a bad day and leave people stranded. So I'm using this unit straight up dumb style. But I am working on my own ride height system strictly for information. I'm also using a Slam Specialties 20-foot harness. Typically I like to build my own harnesses. This thing comes with a really nice waterproof connector, so I guess I'm a punk. Now I'm going to keep a close eye on this thing, and trust me, I will rip this bitch right out if it ever does me dirty. Now this is the approximate location I want to put this manifold. I want to cover up these plugs for the ports I'm no longer using, because I just don't like the way they look. I'm also still trying to decide if I'm going to leave these throttle valves in or not. Now this grimy piece of 1/8 inch plate is the beginning of the bracket that's going to hold the air manifold. Scribe the line across here where I'm going to start the bend for the portion that bolts down to the frame rail. Then I'll come in here and do some shaping, mount the manifold somewhere in this region. If I have some room, I may come down and do some fancy stuff down here below the manifold. Everybody, meet Squishy. Squishy, this is everybody. Squishy is my 20-ton Harbor Freight bottle jack powered press. You can use this thing to press bearings, pulleys, bushings, or if you like to live dangerously, you can make your own press brake and bend steel plate in it. Let me show you. Welded a couple pieces of angle iron down to some tubing, took another piece of angle iron, welded tubing, and married the two together. Gave a landing spot right here for where the ram can push down, and it works surprisingly well. I bent 3/16 plate with this John. That piece was about 9 inches wide. Enough chat, let's ruin some parts. Just get the upper and lower die lined up. Line up the upper die with the line you want to bend on, and go to town. I've got this protractor set up at the angle I want it to sit at least the initial try, so we got a ways to go yet. Okay, the bracket's bent, fitting pretty well to the frame in the tank. Now I need to get the valve laid out so I know where it's going to live. I'm going to run it up high on this bracket, leave some room to do some fancy stuff. I also need to mind how far this valve sticks out. With the tilt bed, I can't have anything sticking out back of the truck too far and interfering with the bed. So I'm just going to clamp this up and mark out the center holes. Perfect. Now for those of you who've been around for a while, this should be no surprise. I'm going to stick a couple dibble dies between the manifold and the bottom of this plate, just for style points. And it looks like it's going to be this size, I don't know. Alright, went through, hole sawed everything out, ready for the dimple dies. As a bonus, I went around these holes with the hole saw, just as a styling feature. Or, I fucked up, tried to drill this hole out, and decided to do this one just to make a match. Now this is the business end of my dimple die setup. It's a Harbor Freight knockout set. It's really meant for electrical work. I suppose you could use it for plumbing and stuff like that, but what it does gives you a set of cutters and a hydraulic pump that allow you to cut really big holes in sheet metal so you can pass conduits or pipe through them. Swag Off-Road sells a set of dimple dies that fit over this hydraulic ram. Now to that I've added an air over hydraulic cylinder, just because I'm a lazy asshole and I don't want to stand here pumping this thing all day.
That's what she said.
All you gotta do, feed this cylinder some air, put your die on the pump head, get your work in place, get your male die on, make sure it's the right way, thread this nut on, and pump away. Release. And viola. Nice little dimple die. After a little bit of shaping, pretty happy with it. Not even mad about these rings I accidentally fucked up with it. Let's go do a test fit. What the fuck? Hell with it. There's a mostly finished bracket. Fairly happy with it. Did have to add a little notch on the back for the wiring to come through. Later on I'll add a cushion clamp down here to hold the wiring out of the way so you can't see it. Now fast forward quite a bit and I've gotten a lot done. Painted the bracket for the Slam manifold, painted all the sections of the frame that needed to get coated, replaced the air lines for the front bags from the cab back, run all new air lines for the rear bags, terminated all the wiring and got it snugged up tight. Now I need to focus on getting all the interconnected tubing for the air system done. So this is the perfect opportunity to show you how I do these air lines. Now the general layout here is the air tank feeds down to a set of air dryers that are mounted to the frame. So I've got to get a piece of tubing from this 90 on the tank down to a 90 on the air dryer through the dryer, out of this fitting right here, up and over to the inlet fitting on the slam valve. Now there's a couple obstacles. Got to come out here, kick the tube out around this tube, which is directly in line, turn a 90 and get it down into that fitting. One thing that helps me lay out is to have a couple straight pieces with a tube and a flare already installed. You can just put it right in place. That gives you something to measure off of. So I'm going to start by measuring the length from the back of this putt piece over to the valve. Alright, that's 12 5/8. I'm going to add about a 1/2 inch just to be safe. One of my big concerns with this setup is this slam valve uses push to connect fittings. My concern is that these aren't going to seal and all this work is going to be for nothing. And if that happens, I'm probably going to set the whole truck on fire. I've got this piece of tubing all ready with a little kick on it, just so I have something to start with. I'm going to kind of lay this in here, make sure these kicks are lined up, and start to develop my piece. So I'm just going to come back here, make a little mark denoting where I want to kick this piece back. That'll get this tube running back to parallel to this leg. Here's the bender I'm using. It's nothing fancy. You can get these at almost any parts store. This has got to be the most common tubing bender on the market. So now I'm just going to kind of eyeball a good spot to do this kick. Make sure it's reasonably straight. Just pull it up till it looks fairly parallel. So now I need to turn a 90 down and start heading toward the water trap. As you can see, I have to jog this whole tube back over this way. If I don't plan ahead for that, I could end up making this whole tube too short and having to start all over. So what I think I'm going to do here is make my 90 dead on to the length I think I need it, and then just kick the bottom over so that it runs down into the water trap. Right? Let's find out. We need a 12 5/8 inch 90. But we're going to add a little bit extra length just to be safe. I'm going to do 12 7/8. Since this end is going into the push to connect fitting, I can always just cut it off if I get it a little bit too long. Something to note on these benders is there's a minimum bend radius. So if I was to grab this piece of tubing right on that 12 5/8 mark I just made and bend it, it's going to end up putting the leg of the 90 further away from where I intended it to be. Having tested these benders, I know I need to take 2.5 inches out of whatever measurement I want to bend. Taking 12 7/8, subtracting 2.5, I come up with 10 3/8. If I end up getting anything screwed up, I know I can just kind of tweak it back in place. There's about 90. I just eyeball them. I bent it the wrong fucking way. No big deal. Little tweaks like that you can make by hand, no problem. There you have it. Essentially headed in the right direction. Now for that kick. I'm going to put a straight edge along the back side and compare it to the putt piece I've got coming up from the water traps. So the offset between the back of this tube and the back of this tube is about half the distance of this tube. So 3/16. I'm measuring the distance of the back of the tube on my kick to the back of the offset. Well, you're not going to believe this, but that's 13/16. So if I take this 13/16 and that 3/16, it's an inch. So I'm just going to grab this joint anywhere I like and pull up a kick. I'm going to call that 7.5. Alright, so over at the bench, got the piece all laid out, ready to make the cut. Now if this piece looks different, I had to do some tweaking to it to get it to my liking. Or I cut off the wrong leg on the piece I already laid out and had to start over. Either way, got this end marked at the 7.5 inches that I measured out to go down to the water trap. To cut it, just use a regular old tubing cutter and deburr the ends with a file or some emery board like this that you steal from your wife. Get the end all nice and pretty. Now at this juncture, definitely want to make sure you get a tube nut on because we're going to flare this end. This is the flaring tool I use. It's a Rigid brand and it's worked out great for me. Just have to make sure it's a 37-degree tool. Just select the 3/8, make sure it's flat with the top of the die, and slide the male side of the die in place. Lock it down. Clamp it down hand tight, you don't need to go crazy. Then just start spinning this knob. It'll make contact. You'll get a feel for how tight to get it. That's probably good. Release the clamp, and boom goes the dynamite. Don't forget the nut. All right, let's see if she fits. Push it into the push to connect. Tighten her down on the tube nut fitting. There you go. Now another thing I've done, I made my own tube blocks. Other than cushion clamps, I can't find anything to hold this tubing. So I just made them. See how these work out. Does a decent job of turning trash into treasure. Now I do have some more work to do on these before they're actually ready to bolt on, but they are nice for all this mock-up. And when tightening down these fittings, you don't need to go wild on them. Just snug tight with a wrench is all you need. Here's a little back-to-back that I made that goes from the tank down to the water trap. That still fits, thank God. So the passenger side of the valve is essentially done. You got air coming from the tank, going down to the water trap, then coming from the water trap all the way over to the slam valve. And this tube goes to the rear passenger side. This tube goes to the front passenger side. Since the exhaust is on the passenger side of the truck, I had to mount both of the water traps on the driver's side. So you get from the tank fitting on the driver's side all the way over to the water trap on the passenger side. For the driver's side, I made this monstrosity. Now I need to make a piece of tubing that comes from this passenger side water trap across the frame, up and into the passenger side feed in the Slam Specialties valve. Once again, just stick the putt piece in. So I have something to measure off of. And this is going to get a little complex. Alright, so blessedly, I got that passenger side feed line in. It's getting pretty tight on material there, but made it work. Comes out of the water trap, runs across, offsets up to miss this exhaust hanger, comes up, kicks back in line, with the rest of the tubing coming into the Slam manifold. But I'm relieved to say that's it for the tubing. Now welcome to my dirty rear end. When I built this truck, I wanted the back end to have just a stupid amount of lift, mostly because I thought it would be fun. Now you can do a bag-on axle setup, or you can do a bag-on bar setup, where you get a little bit of cantilever and a little bit more lift. If you do a bag-on axle setup, you're only going to get as much lift as the bag itself gets. So if your bag only gets 6 inches of lift, your rear only gets 6 inches of lift. Mounted on the bars with an 8-inch bag, I get something like 18 inches of lift out of the rear of this truck, which is ridiculous. It's fun from time to time, but I never actually use that much lift. The problem is, with a larger bag, you need less air pressure to get the same amount of lift as you would in a smaller bag. I may only have something like 20 pounds of air pressure in the rear bags. Now what that really means is I have no spring rate when I'm running at a super low ride height skating down the road. So if I hit a bump doing that, the shocks can't control the rear end, and the frame bangs off the ground when I don't really want it to. So I'm going to experiment with some 6-inch bags in place of the 8-inchers. I'm calling this an experiment just in case I fail on YouTube in front of tens of people. So subscribe, comment, tell your friends. Off-road use only. Oh, of course. New airbag smell. I know what you're thinking. Could this idiot possibly overcomplicate something as simple as an airbag install? 1. Name calling isn't nice. 2. Installing an airbag is one of the simpler parts of this job. And 3. I can overcomplicate it. Let me show you how. If you've ever installed airbags, you may have fought with getting them aligned, trying to get the bolts started, yada yada yada. Well, I don't like fighting with that kind of thing. So I use studs. Since I don't want to have to take any pipe threads loose, if I ever need to remove one of these bags, I'm going to use a 37-degree flare. Now I couldn't find any 3/8 37-degree flare fittings that have a 1/2 inch NPT, so I've got to use a bushing. Now when it comes to thread sealant, I'm a Loctite 567 guy. Who's bad now? There you go. Fuck. Why didn't you guys tell me the spacing on the bolt holes is different? Now the final step in the airline redo is to do a leak check. For that, taking a page from my friends in the INC world using a product called Snoop.
Biatch.
Snoop is basically a soapy solution in a squirt bottle. To use it, you just press up the system, hose down all your fittings, and look for bubbles.
Yeah.
Check me out.
Still doing that shit, Andre?
Oh, for sure.
Now jump ahead again. You ain't got to be the head cashier at Walmart to see I got a lot of work done here. A big ups to Booney, Corey Maya, my buddy Ray for helping me get the bed on and off. You guys are legends, I really appreciate that. I was in a pretty big crunch to make it to Grounded for Life's one-day slam in Bristol, PA on June 10th. Now Bristol, Pennsylvania is a 200-mile round trip for me, so I had to put the camera down and get some stuff done. Why does that keep happening? Now what I got done is all the wiring for the air system, and installed a new glow shift pressure gauge, installed a new carpet kit from OC Carpets, got the sub box and the seats back in, and wired the fuel pump. You may remember I ran 2 wires back to the pressure switch. This switch runs the pressure system automatically. If I shut this off, the compressors will not run. That's really nice because this truck's pretty grumpy when you first start it, so while I'm just trying to get the engine to idle, I don't want the compressors to run. This switch is an override. If I find myself rolling in someplace where the pressure switch is inactive, I can flip this switch, override the automatic switch, and let the compressors run until I decide to shut them off. The cool thing about that is they light up sequentially. So if the main switch is turned on, both switches light up. But as soon as the compressors hit their limit, the top light goes out. Thankfully the truck ran great, and the new suspension setup worked perfectly the whole time. Now sit back down because we're not even close to being done. I've been going on about this recovery port. This is something I meant to do last summer but never got a chance to get to. Now with my truck laid out, I can't get to the air tank or the valves or anything. I have the ability to backfeed electrical power to the system under the hood, but I have no way to get air to the tank if it's empty. So if the truck's been sitting for a few months, maybe it's leaked out, and I just want to air it up so I can push it around the shop, I need a way to get air into the system. When I fuel up the tank, actually I have to tilt the bed to get to the fuel filler, so this door's not doing a damn thing. This seems like a perfect spot to put a port to backfeed air to the tank, especially since the bed will be trapped down if the tank is out of air. This could also be handy if I get trapped on the side of the road with dead compressors or some other issue where I can't air up the system to get it onto a flatbed. So my plan is to use this real estate, put an air chuck right in this spot, and bury a gauge in here so I can see the tank pressure. Don't really need the tank pressure gauge, but it sure would be nice to not have to start the truck up to find out how much air is in the tank. And okay, I got the space, so I'm going to use it. Now buried way back there by the airbag for the tilt bed, I ran a flexible hose from the tank. I've got to get an air line from that fitting over to the gas door. I was not looking forward to running this tubing, but it's done now. 1/4-inch hardline starts at the bulkhead. From there it's just the typical cushion clamps and nut inserts all the way over to where it ties into the gauge. Then it splits off the gauge, comes down to the port. Let me show you that. This little Jamie's the plate that's going to actually bolt in place to the stock filler. Since I didn't want to paint anything made out of 1/4-inch ABS I had laying around for the amp racks. There, it's just an air chuck. On the back, got a 1/4-inch 37-degree fitting that'll tie up to the T on the gauge, and a valve to close this whole port off. I may redo this because I really want to put a check valve in. I didn't have the idea until I was this deep in it. You may have noticed I made a lot of mistakes, mostly due to my own stupidity. I used about 60 feet of 3/8 tubing just to get 20 feet of it installed on the truck. In my own defense, it was a bitch to get all this stuff installed around the obstacles on the frame.
Biatch. Drop it like it's hot. Snoop Doggy Dogg with the caviar.
But in the end, it looks great. I love how wild the tubing is, and it's leak free. I did finish up those 2 blocks with a router, a little bit of sanding. I must say I'm pretty proud of them. Still hopeful that Slam Manifold is going to be a reliable, but I am going to keep an eye on that. So far, the best part by a long shot is the speed of the Slam manifold. Even though it's got 3/8 valves, it's got a little bit of a slow lift and a great control on the way down. Combine that with the 6-inch bags, and I can get this thing sitting at just the right height so I can skip along the pavement super low. Now this is a newfangled Slam Specialties MC1 controller. It's a plug-and-play controller that's meant to work with the Slam SV8C manifold I installed. Now I'm leery of all this 21st century Terminator Skynet stuff, and I was going to use this controller until I was doing wiring checks after installing the Slam SV8C manifold, and the rear passenger valves weren't working. Now I went to troubleshoot that waterproof harness I was so proud of. When I tried to pull the harness apart, the wiring came off in my hands. Now rather than take the harness apart and try to repin it, put it back together, I just cut both ends off and butt connected the whole thing. Like I said, I don't need to be adding failure points to the system, so now I don't have to worry about it at all. With that, I'm going to skip the MC1, reuse my existing switch panel, and build a new one when I put a center console in this thing. You can see that video coming up soon. That's enough fake TV for today. Now go play outside. And thanks for watching.